Well, it's World Cup time. I work for Adidas, so I cannot come around the topic of football. And I would like to share this quote here from the FIFA, where the official position states about sustainability in the context of their events. Um, that's remarkable because when we look at the second slide here, there's a report, which I'm adding also the link here at the bottom of the slide, that analyzes how sustainable the FIFA World Cup actually is. And it compares with previous events. It also kind of typical average. And the reason why I'm showing this here in this context today is this number. It's a little small, but you will maybe realize that in this year's World Cup, there's heavy load of air transport. And here it's measured in tons CO2 equivalents. And it stands out that this is far beyond the average. So why I'm saying that is because it relates to logistics, of course, and the environmental impact of logistics. So why does this matter now? I think you're probably all aware logistics is everywhere. And it will always be around, and it has its significant share in global greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see here with an 8% as stated by the Smart Trade Center organization. And therefore, I believe that projects that deal with logistics are a significant lever to improve sustainability. Just checking, am I still audible? I'm seeing notifications.
Yeah, no, you just popped onto mute, but you're audible again now.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. So I've looked at the agenda. I unfortunately could not participate in the previous sessions of today, but I think there was not so much coverage on logistics. So that's why I'm happy to have you guys on this session today and deal a little bit more with logistics in the context of sustainability. What you'll walk away with, my ambition for today, for the next 40 to 50 minutes is to showcase a little bit what can be done in logistics projects to maximize sustainability. Yeah, many projects are dealing with logistics only maybe on the side or maybe as a work stream or maybe a subcomponent. Of course, there are a few projects which are putting logistics front and center, but in my experience, most of the times, logistics is a subset of the agenda. Yeah. However, today we want to pay a little bit more attention to that. I need to stay hydrated. Hope you guys do the same. It's quite warm here. Good, so what's the agenda? 3 points here on the agenda for today. I would like to start with a very short summary of what the project manager can do to expand their toolbox. I think that's probably something you've heard already today on the event altogether. So that's why I'm trying to keep it short and also to have more time for the second part of the presentation, where I want to illustratively show you an example of logistics projects. And then, of course, closing with summary and call to action. Good. How do we deal with questions and comments? Do we just keep it to the end, or do we?
There is a Q&A box at the bottom.
Okay.
People can just pop questions in, and then we can review those at the end of your session.
Okay. But I'm also happy to take them in between, no, as long as it's not too complex, then of course, yeah. Thank you. So starting with the toolbox for project managers in the context of sustainability. And I've picked 4 activities, and they're probably also not very surprising to the audience. And I would like to start with what I call listening, because when you put your project into a context of sustainability, automatically your ecosystem of stakeholders expands. Yeah? So you will have to deal with more stakeholders. You will have to deal with more interests, maybe also with more opposition. So this becomes far more complex than, let's say, in conventional projects. The pictures that you see here relate to my work context here at Adidas. maybe picking out here the European Union flags, where there's a lot of new sustainability-oriented regulation, as you know, that projects need to deal with as well, because a lot of requirements come from that direction. Yeah. Another example here in this case is the consumer, so the customer who buys our products. There is, of course, attention to a brand like Adidas, for instance, how they perform in certain aspects of sustainability, even though the attention for this topic varies drastically in the society. Yeah. The second thing I call knowing, and this is about the available sustainability standards for project management. I think that has already been mentioned today, I guess, with the P5 standard from PMI and Green Project Management, which is essentially a standard that supports the impact assessment for any project. Yeah, so this is something any project management team can use to evaluate what their project will impact on or how it will be impacted. So the double materiality. Yeah. The third aspect that I want to shortly speak about is life cycling. I call that, or life cycle thinking. That inspires to not only looking at the traditional phases of the project from idea to closing, but actually looking beyond. Yeah, so this is in the context of sustainability super important to consider also the product or use phase after the project closure, as well as the end of life of the respective product. And if you add these two phases to your project management approach, it changes a little bit how you basically plan and execute your project, especially if you want to consider sustainability requirements. The last thing, of course, not without it today, AI. I call that here accelerating. Why? I will come to in a minute. Obviously, the AI capabilities that we have at our fingertips are super helpful to deal with all these complexities that we're facing, especially also in the context of sustainability, because we can hardly assume that every project manager is suddenly a sustainability expert. That's difficult to achieve. However, with AI, we can be much more productive in this context. Good. Now we're going into the logistics example. And please bear in mind, it's illustrative, even though I can almost take back my disclaimer, because in real life, we're also working on the same. It's just not ready to be disclosed. But I think it's super realistic, and it's a good example in the context today. So in case you do not really associate what or if you don't know what a distribution center is or does, that's why I brought a little bit of kind of definition here on the side to explain what happens in the distribution center. Essentially, it's receiving products from factories, potentially from a lot of different factories. It takes the products in, it sorts it, it stores it for as long as needed. And then, of course, when sales orders come in, the products get picked from the shelves, they get packed and then shipped to the customers. There are multiple variations in terms of automation levels. So you could have a smaller, totally manual DC standing for distribution center. But there are also, meanwhile, quite automated distribution centers where a lot of things happen with machinery and a lot of computers. Good. So in the context now of sustainability, I would like to now explain to you a little bit our view on how this can be managed and how this can be seen as a good example for project management. What we would need to start with is a kind of the life cycle again, what I mentioned before. But now I'm talking about the distribution center life cycle. Now, if you think of a distribution center, most people would think of their operational impact. Yeah, how much energy it consumes, how much material it goes through, etc. Maybe also how much land it consumes. Yeah, but before the DC even opens, there are a lot of decisions made in the organization that can already consider sustainability. Now, let me shortly explain to you these different phases here listed on the slide. The first one is what we call distribution network planning. And this is essentially a strategic analysis how the distribution network needs to be changed to cater for demand of into up to 10 years from now. So do we need to add distribution centers? Do we need to consolidate some? Do we need to change locations, etc.? This is happening in distribution network planning. And as you can guess already, this is where a lot of strategic decisions are made. And this impacts a lot the logistics footprint. So basically the eco-performance of the network. Now on the second step, what is called procurement, here this is suggesting that you might want to have a distribution center with a logistics partner. So typically as a manufacturer, you have two options. Either you build your own distribution center or you make a contract with a logistics provider who will operate the facility for you. If you decide for the second option, you would need to go through the procurement process. Also here, comparing supplier offers against sustainability criterions is very important because for the same reasons, you take a decision that could last up to 10 years into the future because the contract durations can go up to that kind of durations. In the middle, that's probably what project managers are most familiar with, the implementation project. So either you really buy or build the distribution center and you integrate it into the network, or you need to integrate the external warehouse from the supplier into your distribution network. That's why I'm putting here the term project in brackets, because it's typically what project managers are familiar with. But you can also consider the first three steps as one big project as well. Then, of course, use phase operations. So this is where a lot of impact factors play at the distribution center. And end of life, at some point, you either terminate the contract with your supplier or you even sell or discontinue the operations of the facility.
Sorry to interrupt you, Frank.
Yes.
The slide, I don't know whether it's stuck or it hasn't been updated.
There's no content yet. I'm coming. I'm just explaining the flow.
Okay, right.
That's it. There's no.
Okay, I'll keep my mouth shut.
No, thanks for the hint. It's a good call out. Because now I want to go into what it means from sustainability angle, because that's our conversation today, right? So if I now try to apply these factors that I mentioned in the previous slide to, for instance, the first phase of the DC life cycle, I would like to go into these factors: listening, knowing, life cycling, and accelerating. I will pick only a few combinations from that slide because otherwise it will be too much content in such a few time. So I'm picking a few of them to also have time for discussion and questions in the end. Now, starting with listening, of course, again, you need to listen to your stakeholders. And one important stakeholder, if you consider sustainability requirements in your project, is the corporate sustainability strategy team or the strategy itself. And typically it dictates targets for the company. And now when you put in such a big warehouse, which is typically a quite big project, then you want to better understand how you can contribute to achieving targets. Now it mentions here SBTI targets, which stands for Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is basically corporate climate targets, for instance, which are externally validated. So it means they're getting externally communicated. And that is why they are so mandatory for the company. And therefore, the logistics function has their responsibility to contribute to them as well. The second thing I want to pick out here is under lifecycle thinking. When you decide for a DC location, you might need to think already about the consequential transport operations. So depending on where you put your warehouse, it determines, if you remember what I said in the beginning, the inbound flows, the products flowing into the DC. It is, of course, very relevant where the DC is. And depending on where the harbor or the airport is, where the products come into, then, of course, the vehicles need to travel either further or maybe a little less, depending on the location. The same accounts for outbound. So that means shipping the products from the DC to the customers. Is the DC very close to the focal point of the customers or the center of gravity for the customers? Then you, of course, save a lot of transportation. By the way, cost as well, of course, but also greenhouse gas emissions. So what I mean to say here is, while you are still in the planning mode, in distribution network planning, you need to think about how many transport activities or how many kilometers products will need to travel depending on your strategic decision. Now, what could AI play a role here? And this is, of course, only a very super simple prompt that I'm showing here. But essentially, I think it's possible that AI tools help you do these analysis. Yeah. So in this example, evaluate the following 5 DC location options regarding their biodiversity impact. Consider the attached rough DC design guidance. So what AI will then be able to do is to combine all these information and also external standards, which I will come to in a minute, to bring all these information together. Because this is, I think, the big challenge for the project management team, to oversee all these complexities. Yeah, the business complexity, regardless or disregarding sustainability, is already complex enough. But then adding the sustainability layer on top is something that is new for a lot of project teams. And by the way, for distribution network planning, there are also software solutions, which typically also allow emissions accounting on the press of a button. So that means these software tools simulate it with their models, the distribution network, mostly for cost analysis, of course, for transport cost analysis. But then the beauty of logistics is that the cost and the emissions are typically very proportional. So that means it's quite easy actually to simply multiply the simulation results from a logistics standpoint with emission factors. And there you go with your greenhouse gas analysis. Good, then going to the next part, which is not the next, but the second next implementation or the project. And here again, starting with listening, because stakeholder management is so important in project management. And here, when you eventually implement the solution or the distribution center, it, from a sustainability perspective, is super important that you consider also, let's say, new stakeholder interests that you might not have considered beforehand. For instance, non-commercial stakeholders, here as an example, sustainable worker commuting. So the question, how will the DC workers actually reach their DC on a daily basis? Yeah? Are there sustainable solution at hand, or do they all have to come with the car, which is of course not very sustainable? Which brings me then to knowing, and here this is of course super essential for our event today. As a project manager or project management team, you need to be aware of the standards that are available. And again, mentioning here the P5 standard impact assessment. And I also pulled out a little bit an example text specifically for logistics, just to give you also a little bit more context in this standard. At the same time, there are, of course, very logistics-specific standards out there that should be leveraged also in any logistics project. ISO 14083, for instance, which also translates into the GLAC framework. And GLAC stands for Global Logistics Emissions Calculation. So this is essentially a standard that helps organizations measure their logistics footprint. As a prompt for AI, it's a quite, again, a simple example. Create a sustainability management plan for my project based on the attached project charter, corporate sustainability strategy, and the P5 standard. So what this assumes is that, like any project manager, you typically have your project charter at hand, which very well describes what you intend to do and what your strategic mandate is. Of course, you hopefully also have a corporate sustainability strategy from your organization, which is available to you. And again, the publicly available P5 standard. And combining these three elements allows to create a solid sustainability management plan, which in turn supports the project management team in integrating sustainability in their project. So looking at the time, okay, good in time. Which brings me already to the key insights for today for my session. What I mean to say is that logistics projects are quite a good example of that we need to manage sustainability aspects or requirements within commercial constraints. And again, as stated in my presentation, it often positively correlates. So whenever you minimize logistics costs, you typically also minimize sustainability impact, or actually maximize sustainability impact, but you minimize environmental impact. Of course, it often comes with investments. So this also to be said, new technologies, solar panels, etc., heat pumps, these things are initially more expensive than conventional solutions. But again, applying life cycle thinking over the life cycle of the facility, they will possibly save costs, energy-related costs. So looking at the key insights here in separation, just repeating here, logistics is not always front and center in sustainability conversation, but it is essential for the value creation of actually almost every company. And that is why it's so worthy to look at the logistics emissions and other environmental factors. The second point here, in projects in logistics, we can leverage synergies between sustainability objectives and commercial objectives. When project managers are aware of this fact, it can substantially improve the business case for most projects. And the last thing is just repeating the factors that I recommend to consider in sustainable projects, existing standards like the P5, lifecycle thinking, and also acting, and AI tools that are mostly available to manage the complexity in such projects. What is my reflection? Projects decide how sustainable logistics operations will be. So that's clearly what I also observe in my work life, that we need to pay attention to these criterions. It does not come automatically. So we need to be aware of what ESG regulations are, what our corporate sustainability strategy is, and then how our projects actually contributes to all this. Closing with our call to action. Start analyzing the environmental and social impact of logistics designed by your own projects. So look at your projects. Where is the logistics component? Is there any? And if yes, how can it be minimized in environmental impact? It's a simple call to action, but I'm not sure if everyone always is aware of the impact of logistics. And with that, I'm already at the end of my part. And I'm seeing Martin is also online now.
Yes, but only on my phone.
On the phone, okay. So closing here with this slide, some resources for your interest is a link to the Global Logistics Emissions Calculation Framework. So if you have not heard about this, if you're interested, check it out. It's available online. And of course, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn anytime. Happy to collaborate on logistics.
Are there any questions? I have one I generated. As AI gives project managers unprecedented power to optimize logistics network, will it become impossible to justify sustainability failures as a lack of information rather than a failure of leadership and priorities?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you probably every one of you experience already personally, AI brings us to new levels of capabilities and knowledge and information. And indeed, I think it's then often a matter of leadership, yeah, to be aware of things, to set priorities, etc. Even before the age of AI, that was already applicable, in my opinion.
And another question, if you put in a new distribution center, isn't there a tendency to optimize locally instead of the global distribution network you have?
I think it's a combination. So you need to look at the network as a whole, mostly at least within the region. So distribution is typically within each region's isolated, so there's no dependency between regions, meaning shipping products in Europe is totally independent of shipping products in North America, for instance. Yeah. But within those continents or regions, the network should be looked at entirely. But then also you need to look at each facility in separation, because these are two different aspects that need to be combined. And ideally, the environmental optimization happens holistically. Any other questions?
Yep, there's one's just been posted in the chat. Considering the global inflation and volatile economy, how can you convince your management and client management to opt for the best environmentally friendly solutions to curb emissions?
That's a super strong question. Thank you for that. And as sad as it sounds, it's not really sad, but it's the reality. We need to combine it with financial arguments, right? And that's why this life cycle thinking is so important. So as I said, if you propose to install a heat pump, essentially in the beginning, it might be more expensive with the initial investment, but it will save operational costs throughout the years. And if you don't apply this life cycle thinking of it, it will be very difficult to influence leaders. So that's why recommendation is life cycle thinking, life cycle costing, and fair comparison between options.
But how long is the life cycle of a distribution center? 10 years, 20 years?
Good question. One of our first distribution centers in Germany opened in 1980. It's still operational. But if you make a contract today, it would probably go around 10 years, at least.
So you have to take into account tearing it down again?
No, I don't think so. Usually you sell the facility if you don't need it anymore, or the supplier will offer it to another customer. Which is also an aspect of life cycle thinking, because if the next customer has different requirements which are not compatible with, let's say, adidas requirements, it becomes, of course, a challenge for the supplier to make it all together very sustainable.
I don't have any questions anymore.
No questions anymore? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, there's a couple just popped up in the Q&A panel. Have you ever worked on reverse logistics, and any insight or advice?
Yes, I have. My first company I worked for, Reverse Logistics Group, worked on take-back systems. They still do so. So here I collect a lot of experience. And we operated circular economy before it was called like that. So this was very exciting for me. And my jump board into the world of sustainability. But even at Adidas, we also already explored circular products and developing consumer journeys where the consumer is invited to send back the product after end of life to us. And we would send the material back to recycling, making the same product out of the material. That was a little bit ahead of time, to be honest, because the infrastructure for such a circular network is super challenging, especially if you want to do it as a single brand. So this is something that will develop, especially in Europe, with extended producer responsibility in the coming years, where the entire industry builds a system, an ecosystem, where all brands participate, either by force or voluntarily, to take back products, to recycle the material, and create secondary resources out of it. So that will be, of course, one of the big developments in fashion sustainability, especially in Europe.
Thank you. In your opinion, why is logistics overlooked in project management?
That's a good question. Maybe it's just my personal perception, but typically in the projects I worked on, sometimes it was the case that other work streams like, I don't know, marketing or product or IT mostly have more attention, because I assume that logistics is sometimes perceived as something that's there anyway. Maybe it's that kind of thing. But yeah, no clear answer to this, to be honest.
Maybe it just sounds not not that exciting as creating some other stuff. The complexity probably is underestimated by most people outside of that community.
Agree. Yeah.
Got a few more for you.
Keep it coming.
Do organizations such as Adidas consider collaborating with competitors to optimize sustainability of supply chains, or is it just seen as a differentiator?
Mm-hmm. Also, it's an excellent question. Yes and no. I think there's a lot of collaboration, especially among sustainability teams, because essentially they know that we're all in the same boat, we face the same challenges, and therefore we need to find the same solutions. Yeah, this is not, it's partially an aspect of product differentiation, of course, but it's not the only dimension. So I would say it's a mix. And I know that the companies speak with each other. I mean, the Adidas headquarters right next to the Puma headquarter, for most of you not familiar with that, but so guys, founders were brothers. And yeah, of course, there are still communication channels. But specifically for logistics, let me give you an example. For instance, e-com packaging. So if you want to develop and operate, for instance, a reusable e-com packaging system, the packaging unit could be today at the customer of Adidas, and tomorrow it's returned to the return center, and the next day it comes to a customer from Puma. So that could be the future. So this is thinkable, and I think that's the direction we should develop to.
Thank you.